Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's panel on Head Start, which stands for Hiring Essentials and Academic Directions, Seeding Transparency in Applications, Recruitment, and Tenure-track Preparation. We chose this name because today's discussion is focused on essential parts of academic hiring, academic career directions, and making applications, recruitment, and tenure-track preparation more transparent for postdocs. Today's event is co-organized by me, Julie and me. Julie serves as the Relations Officer for the PSA and has been a wonderful collaborator in putting this panel together. My name is Abhishek and I serve as the Career Development Officer. I work in Soil Chemistry Lab with Professor Sanjai. He's also here with us on the panel. This event is also special because it is the final event that is being organized under the present PSA board. A new PSA board will be taking over in the beginning of July. And we are excited to see how they continue building support and opportunities for postdocs across the campus. Today's panel is designed to help postdocs better understand how search committees evaluate applications, interviews, chalk talks, campus visits, and the overall fit. Many of us hear about different statements, job talks, departmental fit, and negotiations, but it can be difficult to know how these pieces are actually reviewed by the faculty search committees. We are especially fortunate to have a panel that brings perspectives from different disciplines and units across UC Davis. I'm pleased to welcome Professor Ted Powers from Executive Associate Dean of Academic Affairs, and he's also professor in the Department of Molecular and Cellular Biology. Professor Emily, she's from the Department of Linguistics. Professor Karen from the Department of Psychology. Professor Mark from the Center of Neuroscience, and Professor Sanjay from the Department of Land, Air, and Water Resources. On a personal note, this panel means a lot to me because of the way I understand the role of a teacher and a mentor. In the Hindu culture, the idea of a guru holds a very special place. A guru is not only someone who teaches, but someone who guides, opens doors of understanding, and helps shape the direction of a person's life and career. This is the one reason I deeply value opportunities like this, where faculty share their experience, not only as researchers and teachers, but also as mentors for the next generation of scholars. Our panelists have experience serving on assistant professor search and selection committees, and today they will share insights into what happens during different stages of academic hiring, what makes candidates stand out, and how to prepare for interviews and job talks, and how to think carefully about the fit, networking, negotiation, and long-term career planning. Before we begin, quick notes. For those online, please stay muted, and you can post your question in the chat. For those in the room, I think we'll be having questions towards the end. With that, let us begin with our first question. And can we have a round of applause for the panelists, please? So I'll begin with a basic question. Could you, all of you, please give us a brief introduction about yourself and tell us a bit about your own experience of when you were in the job market and you were applying for different places. How was your experience like? If you had some unsuccessful applications, what changes did you make when you had the successful applications?
Hello, is this on now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I'm Emily Morgan. I'm a professor in the linguistics department. I've served on search committees here in the linguistics department, including joint searches with, we did a joint search with the statistics department. I've also served on a search in the psychology department. So I have a somewhat broad range of experience on search committees across a few different departments. My own experience on the job market was atypical for somebody in linguistics. I actually only went on the job market once, and I know in some fields that's sort of common, but in linguistics that's very atypical actually. Many people are on the job market for multiple years just because there aren't that many positions. But I just got really lucky and landed a position my first year through. So So my experience was atypical, at least for linguistics in that regard. So I don't necessarily have the experience of having to edit things. But just a demonstration that you never know what's going to happen, and sometimes you got lucky, and sometimes it takes many years.
So I'm Mark Goldman. I'm in the Department of Neurobiology, Physiology, and Behavior, and also have an appointment in the School of Medicine in Ophthalmology and Vision Science. My background's a little bit different. After undergrad, I worked for a consulting firm, and then I went to grad school and ended up, I really wanted to be involved in education and teaching. So my first job was at a liberal arts college, Wellesley College. So people have questions about more teaching-oriented positions, and those I'd be happy to address those when we get to that. I then, after a few years, decided that I did want to step up my research commitment, and I interviewed for a postdoc at Davis. It was a great place, so I applied when a job opened. Yeah, I only applied to one job for that, so I don't have huge experience of looking more broadly. Yeah, I think that's my experience. I've been on a lot of job panels. I've been in ones in neuroscience that are open to many different departments. So we've seen a lot of different departmental cultures. I've been on ones that are in other departments like physics. I'm happy to take questions from you guys.
Morning, my name is Ted Powers. I'm a faculty member in Hello. Hello. Well, anyways, you can hear me. You do on Zoom, can. Hello. That seems like the same. Anyways. I'm in the Department of Molecular and Cellular Biology in the College of Biological Sciences, the same as Mark here. And I've served on search committees in a variety of capacities, both as a faculty member. I've chaired search committees. I was a department chair, so I oversaw searches. And then I'm now also an associate dean in the college, and so I oversee all of the search committees that go on in the college. So I feel like I have a broad perspective of different approaches that different committees have taken. So it's really remarkable to see both the consistency and the way things are done at Davis, but also there are some differences that I think we are worth talking about to get to that. My own experience, I was going to say atypical, but we're hearing that a lot. I was a postdoc at UCSF, planning to go on the job market the next year when I became aware of a search that was failing here in the department many years ago now, where the top candidates for the search all turned down their offers, and they were on the verge of calling it a failed search when a colleague reached out and said, would I be interested in applying? And so I had the fortunate ability to not have much competition at the time, and they were happy to have somebody who wanted to come to Davis, and I really did. But that was unique. But I'd say because I wasn't quite ready, I accepted the position but deferred for a year. So that's something to keep in mind to get to that stage, is that there's flexibility sometimes when you start a position. So anyways, I'll stop there for now. That doesn't.
Okay, hi, so I'm Karen Bales. I'm in the Department of Psychology, and I also have an appointment in Neurobiology, Physiology, and Behavior. I think one thing that I would take two things home actually of what I've been hearing so far, and my example is not going to change those two things. One is that the job market is really different than it was a little while ago, when some of us at least were on it. And two, like there's a lot that's due to luck, or at least taking advantage of opportunity when you see it. So I was a postdoc at the University of Illinois Chicago, and I was in the midst of switching from being a monkey watcher, basically being a field primatologist, to doing behavioral neuroscience. So I thought that I had been a postdoc, I was in my 4th year of postdoc, so it was not a short postdoc, but I thought that I probably needed to wait another year to go in the market because I did not have very much out yet as far as the neuroscience piece, right? The switch. But I was looking at the job ads anyway, and I applied for about 4 jobs only because they either were somewhere that I thought I wanted to live or my family wanted me to live, or because it just sounded like they wrote the job ad for me, right? Like there was one that was so like, it was like they said, this, here's Karen Bales and she is this and blah, 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 I want to hire her. And so, and that was at UC Davis. So I applied for that job, among the other 4 and got it. And so, again, there's some serendipity involved. And I don't have the experience of having been on the job market for a long time, but I have served on lots of these committees, as well. And, for a long time, so some of the committees I'm on, those people are now full professors here at Davis. So I'm happy to try to give other advice, but that was my story.
Hello, Sanjai, Parikh, Soil Chemistry, Department of Land, Air and Water Resources. So when I was doing my PhD at University of Arizona, during that time, someone from University of Colorado encouraged me to apply for a position. So I applied for a position well before I was ready, and I didn't get that position. And so then during my postdoc, I did apply for a few positions as they came up. And during my second year, I had my first interview. And so that was at Utah State University. And then kind of simultaneously, the Davis job opened. And I was very glad in a way that I didn't get the Utah job because I would have taken it and I wanted the Davis job better. So it worked out that it happened because they didn't quite overlap. But I think part of the question was also like, what do you do in order to improve your chances? And one of the things that I had been doing all along was giving my mentor, my PhD advisor or my postdoc advisor, my packet to review. And they reviewed it and gave lots of comments. And then it was helpful, right? But then I asked someone I played tennis with, and I was supposed to, he was a professor in civil engineering. And I asked him if he would basically rip it apart. And he did. And it was really hurtful. But when I came out of that, I was so much happier with my packet. And so sometimes people who are mentoring you and they are used to you, they're not looking at it objectively maybe enough. And so having somebody look at your packet that way could be helpful. And I think that was very helpful because as soon as I did, I got those 2 interviews.
Okay, thank you very much. Where were we? Okay.
The second one.
So our next question for our panelists, what part of a candidate's application typically stands out the most to you when you're reviewing? And how might this differ across our institutions compared with focus universities? So we'll just go back.
Okay. So what stands out most is their accomplishments related to the fit of the job description. Because a lot of times we have candidates who don't fit the job description. And they don't always have to be a perfect fit, but they have to fit the job description unless the department to change it decides their mind that we don't really care, we want this person sold, right? But generally that's not the case. And so, their ability to demonstrate that they have new ideas, that they're pursuing novel areas of research, that they've been working independently in doing that is important. I really, and obviously I do look at their publications, I like to see that their work is getting published and it's getting published in good places. The number of publications isn't really as critical, because people are at different stages of their career. So, but the quality of those publications, and then the letters of reference are really important. And so just with anything, I tell all students, postdocs, but undergrads too, that when you ask for a letter of reference, make sure you ask, can you provide me a strong letter? So if they don't say yes, then move on.
So yeah, I think for me, there's the definitely the research statement, talking about research universities is really important. And I think it's not, the fit is very important, but also, so the fit to the job description, but also the vision for where you want to take your research, right? Because we want to see that. We don't want to just see a person who is just going to continue doing exactly what they've been doing, right? We want to know where you're going. And there with perhaps some attention to the fact that although the job description is super important, it's in a context, right? So if you're applying to the biological psychology area of our psychology department, we basically are all essentially people who do behavioral neuroscience with weird animals, right? And so, I mean, we would just want to keep that in mind as you write, but also make it accessible for the other members of our department who don't do biological psychology. Maybe they do social psychology, et cetera. So it needs to be written in a way that they are attracted to it as well. So I guess that would be just my main add-on to what Sanjai already said.
Great, so I agree with what I've heard so far. I would step back and say that, that most applications have at least three or four components. There's a cover letter, your research statement. All of our searches require a statement of teaching. And then until recently, we also required a diversity statement. Those are no longer required or accepted. And then there's the letters of recommendation or reference. And so you have all of those opportunities to distinguish yourself. And the question I think was what type of institution? Well, we're an R1 institution, but we hire both research faculty as well as professors of teaching departments. So it depends on right there, like where the emphasis might be. But all of our faculty are expected, all of our applicants are expected to describe both their research and their teaching. One thing that comes up is when an application looks like it's somebody who's just sending out a mass application everywhere versus someone who's taken the time to distinguish UC Davis and our department in particular, or wherever the application is, wherever the job is being posted from. That raises immediately the idea that someone's interested in the position in our department or university. So that's one opportunity. And then how you are planning both your first period of your position, but as well as what your future goals. I agree with that's really important. So there's many different aspects of where I think you can impress the committee up front, how your application might be unique.
All right, so I'm going to agree with a lot of what's been said. Like Sanjai said, I tend to look more for quality on publications, the number of publications. The letters are really, really important. So absolutely make sure when you're asking for letters, you ask for a strong one. I have seen ones where I thought, wow, this person just got their application sunk by getting a person who didn't really care about this letter. I'd say within the research statement itself, two things. One, that Ted said, it's really important to say why that institution. I care usually less about the particular fit with the exact search because most of the applications are centered there. but that they indicate why they're interested in UC Davis really does help, and that it didn't feel like they just sent this to 25 places without changing a single word. On the particular research statement, there's past research and then there's your future directions. For past research and future directions, the statement of the problem that you are going to address or have addressed, I find to be really important. In other words, if you indicate you're solving a problem that seems, then I don't care how good you are, the problem isn't that interesting. So I'd say that's really, really important. And then saying that you have a logical path to solving that problem.
I don't think I need to add anything on this one.
The question would be, how do you usually conduct your initial review of different application packets? And are there any specific keywords, themes, or signals that you look for into those into the application? And are there any red flags that you see and that candidate should avoid?
Great. So in my experience, this varies a lot depending on the particular committee and the particular position. And this goes back to actually what I probably should have led with, like my just number one thing that I want everyone to know about being on the job market is that it's so random. And I remember being on the job market and I remember people telling me, oh, it's so random. And I kind of thought, like, I'm sure there's some truth to that, but I'm also sure you're just telling me, you're in part telling me that to make me feel better. And then the very first time I was on a search committee, I was like, oh no, it is so random. By which I just mean, not because anybody's trying to avoid transparency or anything like that, but you just really can never know what is going on, kind of, you know, within the department or the set of departments that are conducting a search. Sometimes there's something very specific that they're looking for. Sometimes it's a much broader position and it's really just going to be a question of like, who happens to do some research that kind of sparks the interest of people within the department. There's usually at least some amount of conflicting opinions within the department, right? So there's just so many factors going into who ends up getting hired that it's just sort of impossible most of the time for you to be aware of as a candidate. And so, you know, the best you can do, right, is, you know, write good materials, which of course, like on average are going to serve you well. But just so you know, like there's just always a million factors going on that you just sort of can't always be aware of. Anyway, so all of which is to say, I guess going back to the specific question in terms of how the initial review is done, you know, one piece of variation here, which is going to depend on things like the size of the search, will be things like whether the whole search committee looks at every application, or whether maybe we parcel out the applications where, you know, 2 people look at each application in the very first round to triage who's like moving on to get a full review at all. And that's going to depend on things like, for example, a linguistic search just on average is going to have a lot fewer candidates than a psychology search. So we can treat those applications a little differently. And then again, things like how strongly we're looking for a very specific match to something very specific in the job ad versus to what extent we're just looking for like someone broadly in the field who kind of seems interesting. That's the sort of thing that varies from search to search. It's really hard to know from the outside what type of position that's going to be. The red flags, I think, I mean, the main red flags are the kind of obvious ones, like somebody who has 0 publications, or somebody who doesn't write a cover letter, or just kind of some of those big ones that I think are kind of obvious.
All right, so I realized I didn't answer the part about teaching focused institutions on the last one, so I'm going to circle back to that since I'm the one who had that. And it also will relate to red flags. So if you're applying to a teaching institution and you send in, or you're applying to both teaching and research institutions, and you send the same application, at least in my experience, you will be tossed out from the teaching institution under the category of doesn't get it. So teaching institutions are focused on teaching. Research is still important at a lot of the teaching institutions. I remember when I applied, one of the sections I wrote was teaching through research. In other words, that my research program was designed to teach people that process and teach them to be scientists. But I wasn't writing my research statement of how was I going to get my next NSF or NIH grant, or in that sense. So the teaching institutions still want very strong research components because they want to bring their students to the forefront. But you need to indicate that your focus is around the teaching component. So on other red flags, just some obvious ones I've seen on occasion. I've seen ones where, well, first we mentioned the letters. If you get a letter which is bad, you can be tossed. I've seen ones where someone is negative about something. In other words, note that I didn't have something because so-and-so in my lab scooped me by publishing it first. Wow, that sounds really bad. That does not sound like someone you want as a colleague. So I would say also in your letter writers, it helps if they add something in talking about you as a person, because you're not only hiring someone who has the best research, you're hiring someone to be a collegial, collaborator and colleague for many years. And that's really important.
So in terms of the question, how do departments conduct initial reviews of applications? And here this really gets to the heart of some of the issues of randomness or variableness. So our departments, and we encourage most departments at UC Davis to follow one of two approaches. And what I would recommend is, if you're looking at a university, looking at a position, see if there's any information in the actual application call that discusses how applications are going to be screened. So the two approaches that we recommend is either a blind review where the applications have been redacted, and so the panel, the search committee actually doesn't know who they're reviewing initially, and that is a recommended approach to remove bias in our screening of applications. That's proven to be very effective in our department and in our college. The other is to have a rubric and to insist that departments or search committees use an established rubric where you're scoring on multiple categories: and research strength, teaching strength, communication skills, fit to the position, right? There's very specific ideas there that can help normalize or make it so that if someone would be tossed out or removed because of one particular category, they may score very well in the other categories as well. And then different departments and different searches will look at the letters of reference at different times in that whole process as well. So that's also something I agree is important to consider. That all being said, I've been on search committees where people within the committee and then the larger department would spend an hour arguing about what the definition of a biochemist is. And so it's like it can get down into the weeds, and there can be factions and there can be issues that are out of your control. So it's really just a matter of, I think, trying to understand what the process would be for the particular position you're interviewing for, and then doing your best to tailor a broad and very robust application in all of those categories.
I would say that most of the search committees I've been on have used a rubric, and that the tricky part then becomes often how you weigh everything, right? And also where your cutoffs are. I think it's a little easier now because we can do a lot more Zoom interviews than in-person interviews. So you can have several different layers of interview for jobs. And maybe interview 10 by Zoom and then only invite 3 or 4 to campus, right? As far as red flags, I just want to add to what Mark said, that teaching institutions, not only do you have to tailor it for those institutions, but the people that I've seen get jobs at teaching focused institutions are the real deal. Like they've done a lot of training in that area. They've participated in various types of all kinds of teaching stuff. So if you think that's the way you want to go, I would make sure that you're kind of getting your bona fides, right? Like you're doing the work there so that you can show that you're not just thinking that, oh, teaching is easy or something, and so it's my backup plan or whatever. And those jobs are out there, I've had even with as hard as things are right now, I've seen, I've had students getting jobs at those institutions. And you just have to, prove that this is really like you're for real as far as teaching.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I just want to say one thing about rubrics. I actually, I'm a scientist, but I don't really like them, but I understand their use. But because when people use rubrics, you have to nail every component, because if you get scored low on one component, say your teaching statement or, maybe your cover letter, sometimes people will argue, well, they didn't do well on that component, so we shouldn't really consider them. And sometimes, I kind of feel like, well, I don't think that's quite as important, and we shouldn't be, ruling them out because they have a low score, but other people's disagree. So just be safe, make sure every single document you put is perfect.
Yes.
You have to read that thing and edit it so many times that you hate it.
So our next question is more focused on the actual interview process. So what should candidates expect during interviews, and what are some tips you have for preparing, as well as how to keep yourself settled and manage their when you're going through the process?
Start. Okay. All right. So I think the biggest thing that I can advise people is that during the interview process, it's long and it's tiring, but you are being interviewed the entire time. And it's not just when you're giving your talk. When you're meeting with people one-on-one, if you don't have research overlap with them, and maybe they come across and they're not going to be your favorite person, you're still being interviewed and their input counts. So you have to always be listening carefully and coming up with thoughtful responses. And a big one is recognizing that you're being interviewed by faculty. And what do faculty like to do? Talk. Okay. And so listen, don't talk too much. Okay. When the opportunity is there, you need to talk and respond. But sometimes people kind of interrupt and it doesn't come across very well. And they're so eager to share some things, but if they do it too much, then it might not be so great. So be polite, be gracious, and of course, when you're giving your presentations, those are very important, and getting a lot of practice those. I think you have questions about presentation also, so I'll just end there and pass it on.
Okay, so like I said a minute ago, you're likely to have 2 tiers of interviews these days. And the Zoom interviews, often there's a set list of questions that people are asking, right? So they're asking everybody the same questions. And some of them are easy to anticipate. They probably want to hear about your research or your teaching, depending on what, or both, depending on what kind of job it is. I would just encourage everyone, it's you're gonna be nervous, right? Like it's a nerve-wracking situation. But to go back to what Sanjai said, listen to what people are asking you and try to answer the question they're asking. And keep it succinct and not wander, and just, I think that's for like any interview ever for any kind of job. And then he kind of said it all as far as the in-person interview. You would not believe the things I've heard people say during job interviews. We had someone he finished his job talk. One of the faculty in the audience said, "I'm sorry, this might be a dumb question, but," well, whatever, to ask the question. the job candidate actually said, yes, that is a dumb question. That person did not get the job, right? So, so some things are obvious, but you know, the people you're interviewing with are people too. And if you know, like, if you go in with one question to ask them about their own research, you might not have to say that much, and they might have a great time and think you know, that you had an awesome conversation, right? So I think going in with a little bit of preparation and also just being prepared for when you can to talk about the overlap or what interests you about what they're doing is always a good way to go.
So I agree, understanding what the interview will include, whether it's a Zoom interview or an in-person interview. For our latter rank research faculty, there's always two talks, right? There's a research talk, and then there's what we call a chalk talk, which is more future directions. Typically, candidates who don't have much experience with chalk talks don't do well. They don't spend a lot of time on that aspect, and that can be formal or informal. So I would say learn about what the extent of that kind of component of the interview is important. In terms of settling your nerves, I think if you have an opportunity, and it's been kind of a lean year for hiring on campus, but if you can go to job interviews, you go to other candidates, you can experience what they're going through and learn from, right, what questions, what responses not to give, for example. And also see if there is an opportunity to have someone to talk to at that university or in that department. We have a confidential advisor that we always offer with our job searches, or our in-person applicants that they want to ask questions about the culture of the department or about the college or the university, and not ask if they want to ask the search committee directly. That's probably not that common, but there are some universities that offer that as well. So I think that those are some of the things you can do.
So on what should candidates expect during interviews, I think this was brought up, but I'd say it's now fairly standard for there to be 2 rounds of interviews. The first one would be a Zoom interview that will be quite short and quite scripted on the questions. The typical questions shouldn't be entirely surprising, so one can practice for them. They are going to be things like, what is your previous research or the previous research accomplishment you're most proud of? They're going to ask, what direction are you headed with your research? They're likely going to say, why are you interested in my institution? And they're going to ask, do you have any questions? So you want to think about that in advance on what questions you might have, and ideally ones that are targeted. What I'll say on those is you really should practice. Practice in front of peers, practice in front of mentors, practice in front, and if your mentor has not been on a job committee, find someone who's been on a job committee. Those ones you're going to be expected to be able to describe your past research, for example, or your future research compellingly in not a lot of time. And that requires practice. When you get to the real interview process, again, what Ted said, at least my department also typically does both a scripted talk. That one, again, you can practice and get a lot of feedback, and then you'll have a chalk talk. And I think where people usually win or lose it is in the chalk talk. And some of it is they think, well, okay, I'm only supposed to present a little and I don't know what's coming, so they don't practice. So that's where I think you need to get a group of people who are not necessarily directly in your field, ask you questions that come from all sorts of directions, and to be able to answer them and to be able to think on your feet. And this is where people try to distinguish, what is your work and the way you think about it versus what did you memorize from what your advisor told you. So that one's incredibly important. And then the final one, which Sanjai brought up, is the interviews with people. I agree, absolutely. Faculty like to talk and they feel positive about you if they feel positive about themselves. But one thing you can do to have a better conversation about their research, not yours, is to, when you get the schedule of who you're going to meet with, go start looking up the papers and give them at least a quick read so you know what's coming.
Great, I'm mostly just gonna repeat and emphasize a couple of things that have already been said, particularly about preparing for those Zoom interviews. You wanna have like your 3 to 5 minute pitch about your current research, current/previous research, about your future directions, about what classes you're prepared to teach. Like these questions are pretty standard, even if the exact wording of them is gonna vary from one interview to the next. You just need to have those 3 to 5 minute pitches ready to go. And ask somebody to do a practice interview with you. A mentor or a friend who's been through this recently should be able to go through the whole interview process with you, which can be a way to practice it and get a sense of what's coming up. Yeah, other than that, I think we're good. We've covered it.
Let me just add, because my department does it a little differently, and so different places, we don't have a chalk talk, and I think maybe that would be a good thing to have, but we do have a teaching seminar. So you do a research and then you teach a class on a topic, and sometimes they'll say, well, you imagine you're teaching this course and pick a topic. We've also done, this is your topic, and teach it. And so, you need to be ready for that. And when that's a really hard talk to give, because you're teaching people who probably know it. Maybe not everybody in the room, but a lot of people do. And you need to explain it very carefully. You need to somehow try to teach as if you're teaching students and engage them, but it's harder to engage faculty in that than it is students. But if you try to do that, they appreciate it, I think. So there's just different ways. So you're not always going to give a chalk talk, so we do the teaching seminar as well.
If I could just add quickly, so the teaching colleges will definitely have a teaching talk. So.
That's one quick follow-up, maybe for anyone else, like me, who's unfamiliar, what exactly is the difference between a job talk and a chalk talk?
So typically a chalk talk is, it comes after your formal research presentation, which you describe what you've done. And maybe at the end of that, you have some future directions, slide at the end of your talk, and if you got your position, where you would go. The chalk talk really dives into that. And so sometimes it's like, describe what your first grant application is going to look like. What are the 3 aims? Faculty want to know, what are you going to be doing when you set up your lab, your colleagues, and what if it doesn't work? It's almost like a qualifying exam again, and have that sentiment to it. And it's just an opportunity to see how you think on your feet. It's not polished the same way, and it's open-ended, and it's really a back and forth with the faculty. Typically, they're more restricted who could go. It might just be the search committee, or it might be the faculty. There might be some senior researchers there. It's typically not an open, at least in my experience, an open public forum, because you're also sharing unpublished results, you're sharing confidential information. It's really getting down to what you do in your research. And this was, I would say that for our professors of teaching hired, they, instead of doing a research talk, they would do a practice demo a course. So we do see that as well. Their chalk talk is more like, what is their pedagogy research going to look like, or what would their scholarship be in addition to teaching? If anyone wants to add in.
I do have a follow-up question on the interview thing. So let's say if you have a disagreement with any of the panel members, like, should you be humble and try to agree, or should you state your points? And a follow-up question is, like, what are your tips for structuring a job talk, and how to make sure that stands out to faculty and such?
Well, like during a chalk talk, you will get pushback. It's like, that aim's never going to work because I tried that. You'll hear things like that, and you try to be diplomatic like you would at a meeting or with your colleagues, right? So hear the criticism, hear the concern, and hopefully you've thought about that yourself, and you've got other aims or other ideas to back that up, or you have information you can counter with that person. But this is gonna be a future colleague, so how that interaction goes is going to be important. In terms of structuring, I noticed that's the next question too, so that go on. If anything wants.
One little thing that I remember being told, which I think is really helpful, is to repeat the question. And it does two things. There was the addressing your nerves. So repeating the question kind of gives you a chance to like get your thoughts together while you're repeating the question. It also gets you on the same page with the questioner. So particularly if there's something a little hostile, you're acknowledging in some sense by repeating the question in your own words, what their concern is. And then, ideally, if they get you, they get you, and you have to acknowledge it. If there's a good reason why you say, we thought about this and here's how we're designing around that. And yeah, you don't want to agree if you don't.
I can sort of move on to talking about job talks more broadly. And, my number one piece of advice would just be that a good job talk is a good research talk, at least assuming we're in a research focused context here. So just in general, and I do think that having a good job talk is can really be one of the selling points for a candidate. So give talks as much as possible, and get feedback on your talks, practice your talks a lot of times and get feedback. And again, just all of the skills that would go into giving a good conference talk or giving a good, brown bag talk or colloquium talk or whatever venue, all of those things are going to translate into good job talks. And in terms of job talks specifically, I would say pick your strongest research to focus on in the job talk. I think occasionally people, I don't know, maybe they think they need to pick their newest research, or they think they have a project that's kind of cute or easy to explain, or I don't know what, but they don't always pick their strongest research, but this is your chance to sell yourself. So talk about your strongest research, whatever that is. And did I have another point? Oh, and the last thing I was just going to say is that I think it's also really a benefit if presumably you're going to talk about multiple projects that you've done, because you have something like an hour over the course of this talk. But I do think that if these projects tell a coherent story and really point to what looks like a research program, that's stronger than saying, oh, I've done, I can do so many different things. Here's 3 totally independent things that I've done. But on average, I would say most of the time, the committee will be more interested in seeing that you can develop a research program, meaning that you're doing multiple projects that connect together to tell a coherent story, as opposed to just saying, oh, I can do all of these unrelated things.
So I'll follow up on that. 2 things I'd like to highlight, maybe where there's slight differences between a research talk and a job talk. And also this question about what you choose to present. It may be that you do have a main line, which is your most critical work, and maybe it's often it might be your postdoctoral work, and you're not going to talk about your graduate work. It's fine, and I've seen people very successfully put one slide addressing what they did in their graduate work. It sometimes is good because it may connect to some people in the department, and then they say, I have a colleague I can talk to on this, but then mostly focus on your main one. I'll say the same thing I said about applications. I think in a job talk, it's incredibly important in those first few minutes to indicate that the problem you are going to be addressing is really, really interesting and important. And people sometimes want to get so into their results that they forget to set up why it's an important problem so that their results are meaningful. The thing that job talks often have, and particularly if there's a department like Sanjai's that doesn't have a chalk talk, is a little bit of a future work portion where people will want to know where you're going forward with it. Again, chalk talks tend to be more focused on that, but typically I've seen some element of future work within that. Final one is if you are giving a teaching talk, I've seen many people who get very upset if you do not say at the beginning of your teaching talk, what are the goals for your lecture? So if you're giving a teaching talk, I strongly recommend putting that out there. Whether you do that in a lecture or whether those would be implicit in the lecture, make them explicit about your teaching goals and your philosophy right up front in the teaching talk.
I'll just add that when you're designing your research talk, know your audience. If you're giving a talk at a R1 undergraduate institution, I think it's a broad audience, and you would not. And remember, you know your research better than anybody. It's how can you explain it to an undergraduate? So I feel like where a job talk veers off into difficulty is when even the senior faculty members can't understand the material or get bored by it. And so if you can pitch your research, particularly if there is going to be a chalk talk, you don't have to, every slide doesn't have to have, dense with text and figures. You want to make your points very clear. And it's also an opportunity for the search community to see how you would do teaching courses, undergraduate, graduate level courses.
So I think you've all seen research talks you enjoyed and research talks you didn't enjoy, right? So think about those. And I agree with not making it dense. You don't want to overstuff it. You don't want to have to rush. You don't want to have to, you do want to have time at the end for questions. So make sure it's polished, how long it's going to take. And that, again, that you're getting your points across clearly. One of the most effective job talks I ever saw was as a graduate student. I was a graduate student on the search committee. I still remember it, if that tells you anything. And so there are some things I think you can do that might draw attention or be memorable without being, a cheap trick or whatever. And what this candidate did at the beginning of her talk was stand there for a few minutes without any slides up and just talk to the audience directly and state essentially her problem that she was working on. And I still remember her doing that. And in fact, she's a faculty member here now, not where I was a graduate student. So, another thing that can be fun if it's worked in a way that, again, that's not cheap, is some kind of audience participation, right? Like, or at least a question, who thinks this? Raise your hand, something that's basically to wake people up a little bit. But again, only if it makes sense with what you're talking about. The main thing is you want people to stay awake, to get your message, to be interested, and to look professional.
Yeah, so time is important. Do not go late. You have to finish your talk in time for questions. And it's okay to end a couple minutes early. It's not really good to go late. But if you end too early, that's also a problem. If you end up and there's like 10 minutes talk time still. And then a lot of times, so I'm a soil chemist, right? And so in real sciences, talks where they go into details about the methods and things, and you can avoid that most of the time. Just get to the point, right? And then after the talk, they can ask you about specifics about methods. So don't waste time on those sorts of things. And again, I'm a soil scientist. I was doing a postdoc at University of Delaware. I went to school in 3 other states. And as a soil scientist, though, geography mattered. Right? And so if geography matters for your discipline, you have to work it in, right? And so try to take the problems that I'm looking at, with contamination of soil in this area, does it relate to anything in California, existing issues? How could I connect my work that I've been doing? And certainly on the future aspects, for me, coming to a state school, they want me to address California relevant problems. I can do international problems, national, but I have to show this California aspect to my research for other reasons too, because I'm in the College of Ag and Environmental Sciences, so I have an appointment to the Agricultural Research Station as well. So if I didn't have something that was valuable to California stakeholders, it probably wouldn't work. So you have to think about what your job is and if there's something that you can tie in more specifically to that state or university.
I just want to add one little thing that I thought of, and other panelists may want to chime in on this one, but something I've seen, which is a potential pitfall on job talks, is people say, who's the person who's closest to me? And I'm going to orient my talk to that person because I'm guessing that's the most influential person. They might be, but you're going to get yourself in trouble if you give that really technical talk for the expert in your field. You need to make your talk accessible to everyone, and then everyone's behind you. And you know what? The expert knows what all the details are on your talk already.
So I think our next question, I think we touched on it a little bit as we go through, but it was more focused on departmental fit. So what do you look for in candidates to determine if they'll be a good fit for the department? But also, what should candidates look out for when they have their on-campus interviews to determine if it's going to be an environment where they'll be able to grow at the junior path?
Yeah, this is such a great question, and it's hard for me to know how to answer it in a general purpose way. But I do think that, for example, this is something that's a great that's potentially a great question to ask about. For example, at the end of the Zoom interview, when you have time to ask questions to the department, ask them, like, what do you see as being important in terms of what makes somebody a good fit in your department. And then particularly if you get to the on-campus interview stage, I would say talking to other junior faculty is really helpful, because those are the people that are either thinking about the tenure process or maybe people that just went through the tenure process. And so they'll be able to tell you a lot about how that process is going for them. And I mean, I guess broadly, when I think about departmental fit, I'm thinking about it on kind of at least two axes. One is more like the research axis, like is your is your sort of broad research orientation a good fit for the sort of work that we do in this department? As one example, our linguistics department here at Davis is very interdisciplinary, and we pretty much exclusively hire candidates. We often describe it as like, you always need to be doing like linguistics and if your whole research pitch is, I am the best at doing this exact subfield of linguistics in the core traditional way, you're just probably not going to get hired in our department, because we're usually looking for somebody with a more interdisciplinary take. So that's like kind of the research fit. But then also there's more of the, I don't want to call it like the social fit, because ideally we're not selecting our candidates on the basis of like who we want to have a beer with, but just fits in terms of not the research per se, but other aspects of life in the department, like how much committee service are people doing, or other ways that we like to, for example, sell ourselves at UC Davis are things like the amount of transparency that there is in the tenure process, which I think is true across the board at the university. So there's lots of other like great selling points of the department and the university in that regard. And those are also the types of things that you'll learn a lot about from talking to the other junior faculty members.
So on department fit, I'd say I have a general and specific. The general is if someone's intellectually vibrant, and I just think they'd be fun to have a conversation with because they presented their research in such a compelling way, I consider them a good fit. Now, some of my colleagues are much more narrow in the good fit. And what I'd say is that interview process with the one-on-one interviews, that is where you really can establish departmental fit. And that's where being able, having those good conversations about other people's research will show that you fit with the broader department beyond your own research. And that's where, again, I recommend that you read some papers. It also will help you feel like you can better assess how well you fit through those conversations. In Zoom interviews, many of the searches I've been on actually ask about departmental fit and who the faculty are, who you think your research connects to. So be prepared for that even at the level of the Zoom interview.
I really like the advice about if you get to the interview stage in person, meeting with faculty, ask about, meet with the junior faculty. What is their success rate? Are they happy? Are they advancing? If it's a tenured position, do they get tenure? And then, as was said, who are your colleagues going to be? If you identified a few, do they come to your talk? Are you meeting with them? Do you like them? Is it going to be a place where you could be intellectually engaged and fulfilled? And then beyond that, if it's a good fit in terms of your lifestyle and what you're looking forward outside of academics, to the extent that you can get that information, that's important.
I actually don't think I have anything to add to this one that people haven't already said.
Agreed, I'm good.
So I'd like to take a step back and think about as a postdoc now. So how can postdocs present themselves as independent researchers after spending years as a trainee?
Okay, I can. Well, I guess as a postdoc, how would I, if I think about it, well, one thing is that trying to obtain funding if possible is good. If you can, write a grant proposal, if you can end up being the primary investigator on a grant, that's really demonstrating your independence to go out and get funding, which is important. Of course, you can create your own networks, right? And those networks can start with maybe your mentor, but creating your own network and setting up ways to collaborate with people that maybe aren't an exact fit for what your PhD advisor or postdoctoral advisor does can be a good way. So that you're kind of setting up yourself for success because you have other people who are going to be your collaborators that aren't the people who have been training you. So I'll just kind of end there because I think that's good. I don't have anything right off the top of my head.
So I think that Sanjay featured some very practical, like the things that will demonstrate your independence, right? So the independent funding or collaborations that are different from your advisors. But I think everyone should be ready to answer that question, which is, what are your interests? What do you want to do that's separate? And if there are pieces of that you can start while you're still a postdoc, great, but at least be able to articulate it for people. And the part about networking is really important, because that will pay off in unexpected ways. People just psychologically, we're going to be, we're going to remember people that we've seen before, and that gives there's precedence because of that, even if it's not acknowledged. That's why we try to eliminate bias, right? But I mean, I've also had things happen, like the Society for Neuroscience literally got a grant from a private foundation because someone walked up to me and talked to me at my poster. So I know scientists are sometimes uncomfortable with putting ourselves out there and promoting ourselves, but I think it's really important, and then people know you, and not just you as many of your postdoc advisor.
So in terms of establishing your independence, I think most search committees will know that a postdoc, becoming a postdoc, is training in a lab, and it's likely that the bulk of your research presentation will be on that work, and oftentimes it is connected, not always, but directly connected to the interests of the lab. So your mentor's lab. So I think somewhere along the way, it's distinguishing yourself in terms of what your future directions are going to be. This is what really comes out of the chalk talk, where it's important to explain, what part of the project that you discussed at your research presentation you are going to continue to work on, and make it clear that what that relationship with the prior lab is going to be. Oftentimes we've heard after chalk talk or after research talks, it's like, that was a great system, a great talk, but we've heard they can't take it with them. So conveying to the extent that you will be independent and have the backing of your advisor can be important. Or that you're going on in a new direction. You have preliminary data or ideas about how that's going to work. So I think we all expect there to be a connection to the research environment that you're coming from, but you have to somehow explain how you either are already transitioning or what your plan to transition into independent systems outside of having your own brand, right? Which is sometimes we see that as well. So if you are applying for a K00, K99, R00 grant, that a pathway to independence grant. If you're fortunate to get something like that, that already speaks to independence, but not everyone has or needs that level of independence.
Just to add on to that, if you apply for grants and you don't get them, that's okay. Just make sure they know that, because it's hard to get grants, but as long as you're trying, that's going to help a lot too. So it's good to report when you don't get, especially when funding rates are like 2%.
So I'm going to largely agree. I think it's that future research statement and the chalk talk focus on future, where you really get to distinguish, okay, so of course I was working with such and such a lab which had this program. This is how I'm going to move on and move away from it, because no one wants to have someone say, oh, I'm going to compete with, this power lab that I came from. I will say there are cases where someone, for example, comes from their graduate work and brings something from their graduate work to their postdoc, and therefore brings a unique element to their postdoc which the lab there didn't previously do. If that's your case, please advertise it loudly, because you're going to take it. The other one is when you, in terms of language, and I remember seeing one which ran into this brutally. Someone kept answering the question with, well, my advisor thinks that blah, 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 in answer to a question. They were basically sunk at the point they did that the second time.
So I just want to add on and say that, this advice about making sure to distinguish yourself as an independent scholar, I think it's good advice. I do think it's important, but I would also say actually don't stress about this too much. At least in my experience, this is not a place that I see people failing a lot. I don't know, maybe it's different in social sciences compared to other fields or I don't know what, but by and large, I don't see a lot of people doing the my advisor thinks. And I do think that particularly in linguistics, much of the time, it's very clear already that somebody's PhD work is not simply derivative of what's being done, like what was already being done in the lab. There's usually already, a clear independent component there. So all of which is to say, on the one hand, like, yes, it is important that you do this, but it's not a place that I'm seeing a lot of candidates failing. So the fact that you're seeing this advice doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing it wrong.
I'd just like to agree and add that you can definitely go too far in trying to demonstrate your independence. So I remember another search where a person in their research statement made it sound like they were already they were already working in this new direction, already collecting data. And during the in-person interview, it became clear that they were not. And then everybody just felt tricked, right? So if they had just said, this is where I want to go, I'm not, not what I'm doing right now, but this is where I want to go, no one would have batted an eye, right?
So there's a few more prepared questions. So the next one focuses more on networking. So what role someone's professional network plays in the hiring process? And if you have any tips for building and maintaining an effective and collaborative.
Yeah, I would say you know, I never want to diminish the role of the network. But I do think the good news actually is that networking plays, I would say, a smaller role in getting faculty positions relative to getting postdoc positions. Because certainly at UC Davis, but I think at, you know, most universities, the faculty hiring process is very structured. Because we're trying to avoid bias. And so you can count on these positions, you know, being advertised widely, posted on major job sites, you know, whatever the relevant job site for your field is, or the mailing list for the professional organizations in your field. And so relative to postdocs, which are often just sort of, you know, handed out to friends or advertised by word of mouth or whatever, there's just, I think there is a lot more transparency in faculty hiring where things are posted publicly and advertised more widely, which means that, and then again, when it comes to the review process, as we talked about before, you know, there are a lot of policies in place to make sure that every application gets looked at and things like that. So the good news is that you know, at least in terms of like getting your application looked at, you don't strictly need the network for that. That said, I mean, you know, I never want to minimize the fact we all know that there is bias in terms of recognizing people that come from big name labs and things like that. And, you know, we've already heard some stories here from people who got jobs, at least in part through their network. But where was I going with that? So I'm losing my train of thought. So I don't want to minimize the role of networking, but then I also sort of don't want to scare you about it. But yeah, in terms of building that network, I would say that participating in the professional organizations for your field is one of the biggest things you can do, which you know, can be something as simple as just, you know, going to conferences and making sure to talk to people who are doing work that's related to yours, going up to their posters or asking them questions after their talk, that sort of thing. But then also if there are opportunities for things like getting involved as a trainee member on the board of a professional organization or something like that, those are also great opportunities.
Yeah, I'm not going to have a huge amount, but one thing I'd like to say is when you are presenting at conferences or giving talks, remembering that in some sense you're always there. So think about that when you say, oh, well, this is just something, you know, you've got typos all over your poster or you're really tired. You are interviewing all those cases. I have seen a lot of students who are involved in committees on involved in conferences in terms of organizing sessions of conferences. That gives a lot of visibility and those are really nice.
I would say spend some time developing your network. Go to meetings, go to conferences, talk to people. If you have an opportunity to fill in for your PI at a meeting or something like that, take that opportunity because again, you just never know where it's going to lead. And someone might see your poster or hear your talk who will come up and say, we've got a job coming up next year, a search, you know, don't forget to apply. You'll be in their mind, that might get communicated to the department. So you just never know. So it's true, once the applications land, they're all going to be evaluated fairly, but at least, you know, if someone knows you, then that can't hurt.
What Ted said.
Yeah. The networks are important and they just kind of build naturally, but you have to be able to be putting yourself out there. One thing that I did was, you know, when I went to a conference and there was somebody whose research I was really interested in, you know, so I would, you know, try to make an appointment with them and then also at conferences trying to follow up with the people that I met before, just checking in, saying, hi, how are you? So that, you know, they're recognizing who you are again, because, you know, you end up going to the same conferences, the same people. So you want to make the networks with the people who are established and are well known. So don't be pushy or anything, but just kind of say, hey, it's good to see you again, right? And see, they might engage you more and you can have conversations.
If I add one thing that came to mind. So typically when you're asking for letters of reference, the number will be something like 3, I've even seen 4. And there's the 2, which are obvious, your PhD advisor and your postdoc advisor. So I'd say one of the most important things in networking is making sure that you have a third who can say something strong. And sometimes those can be really powerful letters because everyone knows that the PhD advisor and the postdoc advisor are a little compromised in their distance from, from the candidate they're describing. So if someone who's a little bit to the side says really strong things, that can be very powerful.
Another thing I realized I should mention when it comes to networking is take advantage of all of your local opportunities to network. So in particular, your department probably has a colloquium series. Make sure you're talking with those colloquium speakers. There's probably some opportunity for you to have a one-on-one meeting with them or go to lunch with them or something like that. Better yet, if you have any opportunity to get involved in organizing the colloquia within your department, make sure that your department is bringing in people that you want to network with. You're doing your department a favor by helping organize the colloquium, but then you're also doing yourself a favor by getting to talk with the people that you want.
I do have a follow-up question. Is there a role of platforms like LinkedIn or like maybe cold emailing people for networking? Does that help?
At least in my field, no one uses LinkedIn. So people use LinkedIn if they're transitioning, if they're looking for jobs in industry. But I don't use LinkedIn at all. Cold emailing people is totally fine. I haven't, I shouldn't say I haven't done it. No, cold emailing people is totally fine. You just need to have something to say. But so for example, I just read your paper and I really liked it. Here's a paper of mine that you might be interested in. Like, that's a perfectly nice email. You may or may not ever get a response to it. But sometimes you do. So yeah, absolutely.
Okay. What should candidates consider when negotiating hiring packages, including startup funds, resources, and partner or spousal hires? How can candidates know what is reasonable to ask for?
Well, if you've received an offer, right, then that's when the negotiations start. And this is where you might be able to reach out to some people in the department that you talked with and get their advice. So if you feel like you have an ally, somebody who you're going to collaborate with, you can talk to them and say, I would like to get this instrument, or what can I, and so that's a starting point, I think. Also just talking to your peers who may have recently been hired, that's all really good. And then as far as salary goes, I feel like if you're negotiating salary, you only have any leverage at all if you have another offer. So if you don't have another offer, it's going to be pretty hard to negotiate salary. But you might be able to get something. Like, I think I got something because I have a 11-month appointment. So there's 1 month where I can add salary. I got summer salary for a few years that I was able to negotiate, and things like that. So maybe a student, you could add funding on for that. But I think getting an idea of what the ballpark is for your department that you're going into is the most important starting point.
I agree. This is going to differ a lot by institution, and some institutions, for instance, are very constrained as far as salary, especially because they don't want the new assistant professor to be making more than somebody who's at a higher rank. But there were things here that I didn't know I could even ask for that I found out too late. And so definitely talk, if you know anybody who's, or feel comfortable enough talking to someone from your new department, I would definitely do so. And then, certain fields like actually have a site online where people are self-reporting hey, I got this job and here's what I got. I don't know how common that is, but definitely some years I see it happen in my field. So you might be able to find it online, actually.
So again, there's multiple components here, and it's all great if you get to that stage and you're actually have the offer. So there's the salary component, and I agree that that's a complex thing, maybe constrained. There's, if it's a research position, there's the startup package, right, what they're going to give you to actually get your lab going. With that piece, I would say be very clear on what you need, and many departments will ask you for an equipment list or a list of what you would need, and so that can help justify if you need items for your research that wouldn't be accommodated by what they're offering. There's your leverage to go for more, and they can oftentimes negotiate that other places in that department what you need. So I think being very clear what you need rather than just saying I want more because my friend somewhere else got more. Being able, as concrete as you can be. And then I also mentioned about spousal hires, and this is a very complicated area that, and again, it's going to vary by institutions. UC Davis, again, we've had a very robust partners opportunity program that is coupled to our hiring process. It's a question of when in the whole process you even bring that up. No, you're not allowed to be asked if you have an accommodation that you'll need, but at some point you're going to need to bring that up. And so my project scientist just received an offer, taking an offer as a teaching professor at another university. And my advice was to wait until she had the offer to bring that up. And that turned out to be helpful, and it all worked out very well. See what you can learn along the way of what they offer. They may bring that up if you want to learn about that. But you shouldn't be asked about that. And it's challenging especially during the in-person interview to not talk about your kids or your partner or those kinds of things. And so whether that's a concern might be individualized for you, but I think it's an interesting area to talk more about that.
So on the spousal hire, that one I agree with Ted. Don't bring it up until the end because someone might say, "Oh gosh, we're going to need to do 2 hires, or we're going to need a partner department, and then we're not going to get this person. So we might have offered to this person, but then we might lose someone who really will come." So I bring that up at the end. But once it is at the end, that's the kind of thing. Hopefully, you're asking the department chair. They've offered. They want to get you, so they will hopefully, try to find out all that information and do what they can to accommodate you. The one thing I will say is I've seen people, because you're coming out of a postdoc and you're not thinking about money and where you might need it. I've seen people under ask. I've been on searches where we know we can offer, some amount of money, and someone comes in at half of that, and people say, okay. So try to figure out what that, if you can ask around if or you have, like Sanjai says, some inside connection, try to figure out what that limit is, and don't be afraid to ask, a little too much. The worst thing that happens is you cut it back. I mean, as long as it's not outrageous.
Yeah, I thought I would just back up a step and talk a little bit about like what startup is and how I think about it. So I think the way it was explained to me is the point of your startup funds is first of all to get like just the very basics of your lab up and running. So whatever initial equipment you need in order to just start doing anything. And then basically to carry your research through a few years until ideally you're getting your first major grant. Now, of course, depending on the field, I mean, in linguistics, it's not expected that we all have a grant at all times. In fact, most of us don't have a grant most of the time. But yes, if you're in a field where it's sort of expected that you're spending money to get research done, as opposed to in a field where it's expected that your research costs very little, then basically the idea is, okay, it's going to take you a couple of years before you get your first major grant, and so the goal of the startup is to cover your research expenses up through that time. And so if you're in a field where, for example, it's expected that you have a postdoc that's helping to manage your lab, or a lab manager that's helping to manage your lab, your startup's going to need to cover that for a few years. Or if you need to buy your materials, or you need to pay your participants, or whatever it is, like the goal is to make sure that your startup is sufficient to cover all of that. As well as doing things like, renovating your lab space and buying your lab furniture and your office furniture and things like that. The other thing I was just going to say was I did negotiate my salary despite not having a competing offer. So I would say always negotiate your salary. Another reason to think about negotiating your salary in particular is that you basically only have one opportunity to negotiate your salary. Your salary is set when you join the place, and I mean, of course, your salary will increase over time due to whether that's cost of living increases or raises that come with advancing, through the ranks. But in terms of setting that base salary, you never really have another opportunity to negotiate it. If your startup's a little low, well, you can get a grant a year soon. You can try to get a grant a year sooner, but your salary, this is your opportunity to set it. So it's worth trying to negotiate for it.
Yeah, nobody didn't come across the same, don't try, still try. So what I said, and the response was, show me another offer. That was the response, and then they were nice about it, but that's the first thing they said, show me another offer.
I'll say as a counterpoint, in my college, it's very fixed. Unless you can argue that you should be brought in at a higher step. We're very regimented here in the UC system. We have ranks and steps. And there's details about how that's all constructed. We do not negotiate our assistant professor salaries. It's just something we don't do. So another piece, I think, just if you are, oftentimes you might be the only hire, or if you get an offer, you can be the only one. There are times when a department, maybe or co-departments that are close within the same college might also be hiring faculty at the same time. Have a conversation with the other candidates, right, in terms of what they're being offered. Oftentimes you'll learn about inequities there that can be addressed at that level as well.
And that just reminds me to mention, in case anyone doesn't know, all of our salaries are public. So you can look up the salary information for anyone in the UC system.
I want to revise my question once again. If we are talking in terms of private universities where you can negotiate your salaries, in that particular scenario, if I have multiple offers, how do I know how much am I worth for? Am I underselling myself, overselling myself?
I mean, in a sense, that's the easier situation, because now you can compare across the different offers, and they know that they're competing with somebody else. So the harder negotiating situation is when you actually don't have any leverage. But at that point, your leverage is effectively just if you don't give me enough startup to be successful in my first few years as a professor, then I don't want to do this job, right? So that's not to say that you don't have any leverage. You do still have the leverage of just making sure that you have the resources you need to be successful in that position.
I just want to add a couple of things. One is, okay, so you can think of this negotiation processes in two categories, right? There's your personal stuff, and there's the research piece, right? And for your personal stuff, even if the salary is a constraint, there may be other things they can do for you. And so that can include things like moving costs. There are some places that will, especially in California, ask what they can do for you as far as housing, right? There's some places that can actually give you some money to go towards your down payment on your house. There's a mortgage program that the University of California has where you can get a loan that is better than market rates, right? So make sure you're digging a little and figuring out everything that they can offer you personally that's not necessarily just salary. And then for your lab, in addition, I mean, I think it's very clear, what you need to be asking for is what allows you to succeed and get through the first few years. Remember that one of the things there is people. right? So whether it's grad student coverage or a lab tech or something like that, anything you don't have to do yourself is going to just like amplify your work. So that was it.
Yeah, just to echo that sentiment, that you will hopefully receive what we call an offer letter or tentative offer letter, and it should spell out all those different categories. So it's important to recognize that, yeah, sometimes it's not the salary, but particularly at the UC system, there are other benefits that may outweigh even what you would get at a private institution in terms of covering your insurance or something like that. So you have to take the larger view of what's being offered.
Okay, great. And then we just have one final question. So, do you have any final advice for postdocs? As well as what kind of things postdocs should consider when deciding whether to continue to pursue academia or potentially be quick transition?
I mean, the way I look at it is always that you're gonna reach a transition point and you're gonna see what opportunities you have available and make your decisions based on that. And that's kind of the point where you might have to see how you're doing as far as if you're flexible as far as academics or industry, you can search in both areas and see what opportunities come up. One thing I will say, I mean, as a lifetime academic, I have very little experience myself looking for jobs in industry or nonprofits. I have seen what it appears to me is that having those connections in those areas is even more important than in academics. Like knowing people in industry, knowing people in nonprofits, both to help help the background and how to interact and what to put in your applications, but also sometimes just getting that first job, the first foot in the door.
I guess as the one person, so I mean, part of the reason when I finished my undergraduate, went to industry, in this case, it was quantitative management consulting, was because I wanted to know what the difference was. And I will confess that when I was an assistant professor, I did reach out at one point, and before I moved to UC Davis, on whether I wanted to move back to industry or if I wanted to continue in academia. So the advice I got as an undergraduate from my undergraduate advisor, and what made me take a year going to industry was, academia is really, really fun if it's what you want to do. Often, people don't know what else is out there. I mean, we did undergrad, maybe we worked in a lab, then we did grad school, then we did a postdoc. So, there's a lot of demands on faculty. You're going to be on committees, you're going to be teaching, you're going to be doing research. And if you enjoy those, it is the best job in the world. But to be honest, if you prefer working in a structured research team where you're going to have a little bit more top-down direction, and you'll be on a team where it says, hey team, you're going to do this, and this is the problem you're going to work on, that can be really, really fun. It can be really, really fun to work on those teams in industry. And sometimes you'll hear from academic advisors who love what they do. That's the only thing to do. And I'd like to say that I really enjoyed both of the sides. I'm happy that I'm in academia. I love being able to constantly see new research and see the frontiers, not only of the little sliver that I do, but of the entire field around me. And to me, that makes me wake up in the morning excited to go to work. But some of those team aspects of working in the consulting firm, I really, really, labs have teams and things like that, but there's another level of that, which was really appealing about working in industry.
So those are all the pre-planned questions that we have. So we can open it up now to audience questions if anyone has anything more specific. And if you're on Zoom, feel free to type them in the chat and we'll keep it in.
Thank you so much for all the suggestions. I was wondering, how do you know like you are actually ready to apply and when to call it quit and move on? So like you're applying for multiple cycles, like is it like sometimes like feel like people say, oh, you have 2 more years, maybe get more skills, do these, do that, like, and it feels like it's a never-ending journey sometimes. So, and then like all of a sudden you get an offer and that changes your perspective, and but that doesn't go all the way through. And then like it's very depressing at the end because you put all the effort and you could go to industry, do a lot of interesting work out there. And one thing that's going to be missing is like you will not be able to do whatever you wanted to do. And you have to leave that on the table to do for someone else to do. So that's the emotional burden as well. So how do you like start like, okay, so I'm going to do this. And then when do you actually decide yourself like, okay, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to move on. So is it like, I know this is very broad question, but if you guys can point something, that would be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So to address the first part of it, the question of how do you know when you're ready to go on the job market, there I would say talk to your mentors, because that definitely varies a lot from field to field in terms of things like whether you're expected to have had a postdoc, how much postdoc experience you're expected to have had, et cetera, in terms of being a serious candidate on the job market. So I would say, yeah, because it's field specific, basically just talk to your mentors, and that should be a very reasonable conversation for you to be having with them at any stage. So whether you're, I mean, it's even a reasonable conversation to be having as a first year PhD student if you want to, not obviously the question at that point, the question isn't, am I ready now? But the question is like, what does a successful applicant look like? But certainly from the earliest stages of being a postdoc, it's very reasonable to be asking questions, even if you think you're in a field where a longer postdoc is expected. It's very reasonable to be asking questions about like how many years of postdoc is expected, or what would a good number of publications look like, or a good amount of research experience look like for me to go on the job market. In terms of knowing if you're doing it for multiple cycles, and the question is like, when do you decide to call it quits, and maybe look for industry positions instead, that I think it's purely a personal decision. I mean, if you're going through many cycles on the job market with like really no interest, then I would say, you need to take a hard look at your application materials or your track record or something, right? But it's certainly possible to go through many cycles where, you're getting some interviews, like clearly you're in the running, and it's just, there's always more good people than there are jobs. And if that's the case, there really is a decent, like you're clearly in the running, you clearly have some decent odds. It's just nobody has great odds necessarily. And then it's really just comes down to a personal question of like, how long are you willing to, live in the sort of limbo state of being a postdoc for, and at what point does it end up making sense to you to look for a different type of job. But just the final thing that I'll say on that note is that, in my, I can't speak from my personal experience because I've been in academia this whole time, but obviously I know a lot of people who, went through some number of, well, either who figured out after their PhDs or their postdocs that they didn't want to apply for academic jobs at all, or who went through some number of application cycles and eventually ended up transitioning into industry. And they're very happy and they're living great lives, and I'm very happy to be in academia, but I also, whine about my job all the time, right? And so, whichever track you end up taking, there's pros and cons both to being in academia and to being in industry. And even if your heart is set on academia and you end up at some point deciding that it makes more sense for you to go into an industry job, there's a lot of fantastic industry jobs that you can be really happy in.
So I know that I know people who have been trying to get faculty positions and had interviews and, it didn't work out. They went and did consulting, but they still kept applying. And they did get it. They have a great job You know, they have a University of Madison, Wisconsin. They're doing great. And so, because it's all like timing, you know, like the job, especially if your field is more like niche, I think that job isn't going to be open everywhere, and so it's the right time. So maybe you're just not hitting the right time. You keep your eye open. Also, there's a lot of people I know who wanted faculty jobs, but now they work for environmental sciences here, so they work for like EPA or in the state agencies, and they love it. And because they had no experience with that before, right? So how could they know what that's like? And I think that is a really big problem. Is as a postdoc, you don't see people doing other jobs. And, so you might love something else, and I wouldn't consider it like, oh no, it's a failure or anything. It's like, well, let me see what else is out
there. Thank you so much for all the insights being provided. So my question is there a way that the duration or how long you stay on the postdoc will affect your chances with the faculty, maybe positively or negatively? Then another one is in terms of the referencing, because we're talking about the importance of getting strong references. So sometimes you stay on the postdoc maybe a little longer. You also establish some other connection, people you are working with over the postdocs, maybe in different labs. So is there a point that maybe if your PhD advisor does not write a reference letter, it will still be fine? Or is it a must that the letter must come from your PhD advisor?
I think that there's a lot of situations like that you're talking about that could happen, right? So yeah, it might have been a long time since you did your PhD. Maybe your PhD advisor is a jerk and you don't really want them to write a letter for you. Like I've seen, that happen too. And so, I think first keep in mind that other people in the field usually will know that that person's a jerk. But yes, if you have more recent collaborations, more recent people who can write you a really strong letter, I wouldn't worry too much about not having your PhD advisor. Also, there's a lot of times when people, so how long you're in a postdoc can depend on a lot of things. Maybe you're switching fields like I did. Maybe you're trying to, maybe you take time off because you have a baby or have other personal things happen in your life. And, I think most of us now are aware, like try not to consider so much the length of time because it can lead to biases against different groups. But if something like that is the case for you, you can also have one of your letter writers address it. This person had a lot of trouble getting this research model working, but they persevered, but it set them behind by a year. Or this person took time off for family reasons and that kind of thing. So you can get that information in there for your letter writers if that's the reason that you're in an extended postdoc. And I think also everyone just understands these days too that jobs are scarce and that people are having to spend more time possibly in postdocs than they used to. I don't know if that directly answered your question. Does someone else have?
I'll just say that we generally try to evaluate candidates in terms of their achievement relative to where they are in their careers. So, often when we're advertising for assistant professor positions, certainly in a linguistics department, we might be evaluating people that are finishing their PhDs up through people that have already been in an assistant professor position for a few years and are looking to transfer universities. And so, we're evaluating people that just have very different amounts of experience. And obviously that is hard, but we are doing our best to, we're never just counting publications, but even to the extent that we're looking at, what is like the breadth and the depth of a person's research track record and publication track record, we don't expect the same thing out of the final year PhD student that we would out of the person that had done a postdoc for a few years plus a few years of assistant professor already. So, right. So I would say like the duration of the postdoc for us really doesn't matter, but then we're evaluating what have you accomplished relative to that duration.
With AI making it easier to push out a lot more papers, and then also easier to tailor specific application packets to the job requirements. How do search committees adjust for this? And how does it how do you make yourself truly stand out? And finally, are search committees going to rely more on in-person interviews to evaluate candidates given things?
I mean, I don't think there's anything as off-putting as a letter that's obviously written by AI. So I would make sure that you're letting yourself show through your letters and not the big language models.
Was not aware that it's going to increase people's productivity with papers, but might decrease the quality. I think that and I don't know that impacts the importance of the in-person interview already. That's really important. I agree with what Karen said, is that, that to the extent that the application reflects you, who you are, your values, and your interests, you'll be well served.
I think AI is going to make it harder. I think that people, if you're using AI and AI gets to know you, right, then they can probably write applications that are quite compelling and even seem tailored to yourself. But that's a problem we face everywhere right now. Like faculty are just, scratching their heads or throwing their hands up in the air about, teaching in AI. It's a challenge. But there's still, the facts are the facts, right? What you've accomplished, those things are still going to definitely be evaluated. We just have to adapt. The faculty are going to have to adapt, and people applying for positions are going to have to adapt. And we're always trying to get ahead of it and figure out how to evaluate people fairly and to find ways to make sure that we are evaluating them based on their merit. It will be a challenge, I think.
Sometimes, it happens both in PhD program or in a postdoc position where you find yourself that your PI is not the most supportive, and that can lead to lack of publication or a lack of potential letter of recommendation, or you can't even attend conferences, so you build your network. One question is regarding this: how can you still make your application somewhat competitive and strong? And also, going back to the actual job talk, does your research either has to be coming from your postdoc research and or your future direction has to be linked to that? Or can it be something like, I'm just having an idea, I don't have preliminary data, but I have this idea that I could do, and I'm very confident I could be an independent researcher on that field, given obviously I haven't done. It's sort of a complex question, but
I think that's a really hard area to navigate, conflict with especially with your immediate supervisor that you've been working with. It's always, we were talking about red flags earlier, to not have a letter from your postdoc advisor. That's where you're coming from. It really needs to be addressed somewhere, either in your application or from another letter writer, and how that impacts your research project. It will just depend on how compelling your whole, I think, story is, what you've done in terms of your publications, what you did as a graduate student, say if the issue is more recent. It can be done. I've seen successful applicants deal with that, but it is an additional challenge. And I think getting good advice from colleagues on how to tailor your application would be very important. So if you know people who have been on search committees, have that conversation with them, how to best detail that. I think if you have components of your application or of your research plan that's based on your productivity, that's helpful, and then you can branch off into your new ideas from there. That's what we've seen. I've seen that successfully pitched in the Chalk Talk. But just have a complete separation from what you've been doing to what you're proposing to do with nothing, that would be a risk. The committee would be seeing that they're taking a risk on you, and there'd have to be compelling reasons in your application, I think, for that to be successful. I'm not saying it's not possible, but that would be a challenge.
I think the letter from somebody in your department who can sort of attest to the problem and that it's not you who's the problem is critical. You know, otherwise it won't work. So you can try to do everything else, but you have to have somebody vouching for you in a letter.
So on the search committees, like multiple professors there, so they have like personal preferences. So I like this, like person to be my colleague versus the other person likes this. So how does this like academic search committee acts as a group instead of like personal? Do they have like some sort of like numbering system, like how they figure out like, okay, so at the end, this is the person, even though maybe head of the chair, like doesn't so much like that person to be hired, get hired.
This is really just gonna vary from committee to committee, whether people try to do things by consensus or by vote or whatever. At Davis, the department chair is actually not allowed to be on the search committee. To partially try to, avoid these situations where like the department chair is just determining everything. But that said, even from department to department or search to search, it can vary who's even making the decision. So whether the decision of who to hire is being made by the committee and then maybe like approved by the department versus being made by the department as a whole, all of this stuff can vary. So this is like well into the realm of things that are just well outside your control.
I know like who is on the search committee and I can network with them and then maybe get a job. Is that how it works?
No.
No.
At the end of the day, all departments have to vote on who they are going to extend a position to. And so even if it's typically the search committee makes a recommendation, the department will vote on that, and then that's the ranking of the candidates to go forward. So some departments, the chair may have more power than others. This is typically not the case, but at the end of the day, there needs to be consensus in order to make that appointment within it's an academic senate pathway to be in a particular department.
I think that if you happen to know somebody who's on the committee because you've networked before, that's great. But I would never try to contact a member of the search committee that you're applying to. They're
One more question here. One more.
except for the chair, if you have questions, right? If you have questions about the job, you can contact the chair of the search.
Thank you very much for sharing your expertise. And I'm a postdoc. I just recently started 2 months ago, and I would like to know about the opportunities in the US. I'm prior to moving to the academia field in here. So, what are the research industry the opportunities? Purely focus on the research. As an example, I know in the UK there are some universities which are purely based on the research. So, are there such kind of the opportunities here as well, like research focused universities?
Let me see if I understand your question. So you're talking about full research positions at universities, or so for instance at Davis we do have research track faculty. It's called the Professional Researcher Series. Those jobs often require that you're providing your salary through grant money. So that can be tough, right? Although sometimes there are the opportunities to move into one of those kinds of positions with your first, few years of salary covered, for instance, while you and with startups. So those kinds of things do exist. I think they're common and universities that have medical schools in particular. Someone else wanna?
But just to clarify, like sort of, someplace like Davis, we are an R1 university, so we're a major research university that does a lot of research. And the sort of most default type faculty position to be hired into would be one that includes both a research and a teaching.
In my department, there's in the past, maybe not so much now, there's been quite a few people who have had postdocs and then transferred into a professional researcher. And I gather that they're getting the grants on their own, but also, in the past, they've kind of been still working with their postdoctoral advisor, and so they get the grants together. But those are kind of more like rich positions I've seen until they get a faculty position. So they want to have a higher salary, more independent, and maybe you can only be a postdoc for 5 years. Sometimes that can be at UC Davis. That can be a problem. So I think that sometimes they happen for people who are at the end of that 5 years or just are able to get a lot of funding and can get a boost in salary too.
So that's true, the 5-year rule, but then we have the project scientist category that many postdocs, some of you have transitioned into. That can allow you to continue here beyond that. Some people do that for many years. It's not considered a terminal position. We have other types of positions, including what we heard. But there are research institutes like Scripps in San Diego. I mean, there are other places where the focus is on research. Typically, there is an affiliation with the university for teaching as well, but there are those opportunities.
And just one last quick question from the chat here. As a postdoc, what's the best way to network conferences and collaborate to do research so that you end up being remaining funding and running separate programs on launch?
In terms of setting up a collaboration, and you typically start by going to someone's talk or to their poster, and you start up a conversation. And if you have obvious overlap where it's going to be beneficial to both parties for you to pick up some part of a collaboration and they're picking it up, then you can offer to collaborate. So I think that's probably you go to someone's poster and you say, I'm really interested in this and have overlap. Would you like to, have lunch at the conference today?
Okay. Thank you so much to all our panelists for sharing your experiences, your time, and your honest insights with us today. This was really helpful. We really appreciate all the advice that you've given us today. Thank you to all the people who have joined us in person and online on Zoom. We hope today's panel gave you a clearer view of how academic hiring works and how you can prepare for the process with more confidence and strategy. We wish you the very best, and let's have a round of applause again for the panelists. Thank you for coming, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
And Abhishek, I have the privilege of working with. He's in my lab, and he's been serving in this role, and he's done a lot for the Postdoc Association. And I think that just congrats to Abhishek for the work he's done for the. Well,
Yes.